Okay, so here's a story, Ryan, that I have heard probably a half a dozen times now. And people are writing books about this. It's kind of ridiculous. So I wanted to throw it past you. If I were to mention the Roaring Twenties, you would think of Prohibition and Flappers and the Charleston and all that kind of stuff.
Flap.
And
That's what I would think of.
exactly, exactly. Well, what's going on right now is people are looking back at the 1920s and saying there's an unbelievable similarity as to what's going on in the 2020s. And are we headed for the same place? Here, take a look at this. The Roaring Twenties started with a worldwide pandemic, the Spanish flu. There were huge advances in technology. People started buying things on credit for the first time. They started buying things in the stock market on credit for the first time. There was a lot of inflation, and there was this huge gap between the really ultra wealthy people and the average worker. Sound familiar? It's all going on today. And the reason they bring this up is because how did the 1920s end? In the Great Depression. How will the 2020s end? Who knows? So if somebody brings something like that to you, Ryan, and says, this is just really kind of bugging me here, and I see just a lot of these stories out there, how do you approach that with somebody who comes in who's kind of thinking that the world is coming to an end financially?
Well, I haven't seen anything. No one's brought this particular issue, kind of up to me.
Okay.
Uh, but my general thoughts on this are, yes, you could certainly draw similarities. There are seemingly every week some type of market predictor, prognosticator, economist, expert, quote unquote expert, if you want to say that, that's always drawing some comparison to some point in history in the stock market. And if we don't learn from history, we're bound to repeat it. That is the great saying. But
Mm-hmm.
you know the stock market, starting in 2020, and this is my thoughts, starting in 2020, the stock market and the economy really kind of became two disconnected items starting in that point, just simply because of the situations that happen. And everything that we used to really rely on to try to predict market patterns, where you're looking at unemployment rates, the yield curve, any area of the stock market really became so disconnected that there really wasn't a true way to kind of predict as much as you really could predict what's going on in the stock market. And there's been so many comparisons drawn that, this is exactly what happened in X period of time or this period of time, that, it happens so often that, it's a blind squirrel finds a nut every now and then, because there's another economist that I follow, the HS Dent organization. And they always said, everything they always talk about is the next market crash, the next market crash, the next market crash. 2008 happened. They said, oh, we predicted the crash. Well, if that's all your message ever is, every year there's a crash coming. Once it happens, yeah, you're right. You did predict it, but you've been kind of saying that for forever. And that's kind of how I feel with this. Is there's always going to be someone out there that's saying the stock market's going to crash. We're going to have this, depression happening. Depression kind of seems like it happens all the time in the news. But if you're looking at this one specific article, the 1920s, yes, there are similarities. We had this massive, massive technology boom in the 1920s, which is pretty similar to kind of what we're seeing in the AI space. We have celebrities like Bezos and Musk and the Jensen Huang, the CEO of Nvidia, who've, net worths have just exploded, over the years. Very similar to what we saw in the 1920s with the Rockefellers and people of that nature. But, times are a lot different now than how they were back then. Back then, not everybody really had access to the stock market. So yeah, they were buying stuff on credit. Credit was something that was just becoming something that's there. Everybody puts everything on credit cards now. That's just kind of the way the world goes. Everyone has access to the stock market. They didn't have access back then. So a lot of things are different. So I really don't think that we are truly going to see a massive, massive crash in the stock market like we saw in the 20s. Certainly, you could argue that we are in some type of AI bubble, because all that area has done is gone up and up and up. And if you're not thinking about what happens if this AI bubble pops and it really is a bubble that the stock market could crash, well, you don't have a plan in place. And that is one of the things that we talk about all of the time with our clients. You hear us talk about it all the time on the radio. Everybody feels well and good and, happy about retirement, happy about what's happening as long as the stock market's going up. And then as soon as the stock market turns or doesn't have a good year, you feel really bad about your portfolio. You start to second guess your retirement. You might push off your retirement date 1 or 2 years because you've had a bad a bad period of time in the stock market in your portfolio. But it always comes down to having a plan. You want to make sure that you're creating income streams that you and your spouse can outlive. Pretty much everybody out there is going to have Social Security. Some people are lucky enough to have a pension. You want to sit down and look at, where is my income going to come from that's not reliant upon the stock market? Once you know that number, then you then look at, here's how much money I'm spending a month right now. Here's how much money I want to spend a month in retirement. And what is that difference between the income I have coming in that's not reliant upon the stock market and how much I'm spending? What's my bogey? Is it $2,000 a month, $3,000, $4,000, $10,000 a month? What is that number? And then we come up with a plan that says, here's where that money's going to come from. You can use the overall stock market. You can use dividends. You can use bonds. You can use CDs. You can use annuities. It's creating a plan so that you know exactly where your money's going to come from in retirement and exactly how that money is going to be affected by the stock market. And when we sit down with clients, we sit down with radio listeners, we're going to lay out all those options of, here's where your income's going to come from. And then here's how we can do it so that that income itself is also not reliant on the stock market. It's going to last as long as either one of you or your spouse is alive. And it's going to be a consistent number, whether the stock market is up 20% or down 20%. But the overall message is that you have a plan in place for the market ups and the market's downs. And I encourage you, if this is something you're curious about, or if you're asking your financial advisor, what does retirement look like for you? And they keep showing you those Monte Carlo reports that says you have X% chance of success without telling you, here's exactly where your income's going to come from in retirement. I encourage you to give us a call at 866-597-1040, 866-597-1040, and sit down with myself, Mike, Lawrence, Faisal, Catherine, any member of my team here at Prostatis Advisors, and let us put together a retirement plan that shows you exactly where those reliable, predictable income streams are going to come from in retirement. Give us a call, 866-597-1040, 866-597-1040, or if you're like me and you hate picking up the phone to make appointments, you can go to the website, thesavvyinvestorradio.com. That's thesavvyinvestorradio.com. Right at the top of the page says schedule my appointment. You're looking at your calendar and our calendars in real time without ever having to pick up the phone. I just did it myself, had to schedule service for my wife's car, did it all online. And then what happened? They called me. But you can do it all online without ever having to pick up the phone with us, thesavvyinvestorradio.com.
Yeah, you're so right about this, and it kind of light bulb came on for me as you were talking. We can find stuff like price to earnings ratios and interest rates and politics and the national debt and taxation and wars and all that. You can find that stuff everywhere, and you can find somebody who's always going to say the market's on the edge of a cliff. But you know what? For the last 60 years, you've been living through exactly the same headlines. That stuff's been going on all the time, every minute, all the time, through your entire life. The question is, as Ryan just said, where's your paycheck coming from? Over these years, it's been coming from an employer. Now it's going to come from you. Does it have to be that different? Do you have to be scared of these things so much? Give the team a call. Go online, and if you go to thesavvyinvestorradio.com, you're going to see the button right there that says schedule a call. And when you do that, it really does schedule a call where you sit down and start to talk about what you're concerned about, what you've done for retirement. Somebody will ask, what have you done to save? Do you have a 401k? What are you doing with that? Do you have other places that you've saved for retirement? And that conversation starts to unfold. And then the questions start to come out. And that's where the real work begins. Then let's sit down at the table and put the papers out and really get down to it. If you save $500,000 or more for retirement, this is where you're really going to see the benefits of planning really kick in. Give the team a call, 866-597-1040, 866-597-1040, or thesavvyinvestorradio.com.